Well, The Gray Man was probably the most Michael Bay film I've ever seen that wasn't directed by Michael Bay. The Russo brothers bring a massive action thriller to Netflix, but should it be at the top of your watch list? When the CIA's most skilled operative accidentally uncovers dark agency secrets, a psychopathic former colleague puts a bounty on his head, setting off a global manhunt by international assassins. Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans star in this action-packed, globe-trotting adventure, along with Ana de Armas, Rege-Jean Page, Jessica Henwick, Wagner Moura, Dhanush, Alfre Woodard, and Billy Bob Thornton. Now, it's easy to tell that both Gosling as Six and Evans as Lloyd are not necessarily good guys because they have facial hair. I mean, if they were innocent, they'd be clean-shaven, right? I mean, isn't that the villain trope that movies typically use? Well, either that or the facial hair denotes a more serious persona. Regardless, though, Evans is still doing his best to break away from his heroic Captain America role by playing the antagonist of this story. And this story is pretty basic and mostly uninteresting. We have a bad guy who wants something, and when he doesn't get it, he sends in more bad guys to retrieve the thing. As motivation, the bad guys kidnap someone that's important to the protagonist, leading to a hunt and chase as the good guy races to rescue the kidnappee. Now, the overall story will most likely remind you of Taken, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely is a familiar storyline. And just because it's basic doesn't mean that I wasn't invested in the story, at least a little bit. I mean, I was rooting for Gosling 6 to reach his goal and be the hero that we think he can be. I like, too, that he's damaged and not really a good guy. I mean, at least based on his circumstances. But at least he has a moral code that he lives by and he sticks to, which then gives him honor. Gosling also has some quiet charisma and charm, and his character here feels a little like he's channeling the driver because he's not talkative, but focused and then can be violent when it's called for. Now, Evans is almost comical at points as he plays Lloyd, a freelancer with a lot of special skills when it comes to doing bad things to people. But he's tantrumy, and therefore very childish. I mean, it's hard to take him seriously at points. But at other times, that childish impulsivity adds a good level of menace because he's pretty amoral, and then is the opposite of Six when it comes to honor. Now, the action in this film is really the true reason to watch. Because the story is so basic and thin, the plot progressions are very predictable. But this is pretty much wall-to-wall action, with very brief pauses in the craziness. There are car chases, hand-to-hand battles, massive gunfights, explosions all around. I mean, even a train sequence that took what was done in Shang-Chi and made it more insane. These were a ton of fun, and it kept the adrenaline level at a maximum. In these action sequences, sometimes the camera work was outstanding, putting us into the middle. But then there were other times where the editing was jarring and abrupt. And I'm not talking really even about quick cuts. The camera movements and the way the scenes were cut together, they just didn't always flow smoothly. And there were also quick cuts in the action, which then detracted from some of the immersiveness of a fight. Now, sometimes, though, we got to see more of the choreography, which then made the entire production just feel uneven because they couldn't commit to a certain visual style. The pace of this is harried and fast, and that's helped along greatly due to all the action and editing that I had mentioned. Now, some of the cinematography is decent, and the Russos employ a lot of motion in their camera work. Now, some of it looks good and it works to bring us into the action. Other times, it becomes distracting because the camera just can't sit still long enough to focus on a character. There are also a bunch of aerials that are attained through the use of a drone. Now, the drone work is cool as the camera flies around subjects and over obstacles and even into buildings. But this would have been even more impressive if I hadn't already seen it done in the Michael Bay film Ambulance earlier in 2022. The special effects are varied in their quality, but I'd say that more often than not, they lean more towards the poorly executed side than convincing and realistic looking. There's a scene within a plane that has some insane action, which was really exciting to watch. But when the crap hits the fan, the camera work and the visuals, they get very blurry and messy, taking a ton of the realism out of that scene. And for then whatever reason, the finale of that sequence, it's not resolved. It just goes to black briefly, and then we're on to the next scene. And something curious to me is that there is this torture scene that is almost good. I mean, it has the potential to be very painful to watch, but the camera shies away from the actual deeds. Now, I listed a bunch of other actors along with Gosling and Evans, and out of all of them, Ana de Armas certainly has the most screen time and action sequences. She kicks some serious butt, and there are a couple of really intense fights that she has with Dhanush that were really engaging. And as much as I enjoyed seeing de Armas in the role, her character is just kind of a throwaway sidekick role. I mean, she got to show how proficient she was at fight choreography and action, which I do appreciate, but the role itself wasn't deep or remarkable. Dhanush was stylish and calculated, which was also great to watch, but just like de Armas, his role was pretty generic. And I think that's one of my biggest complaints with this entire thing. The characters are all fairly common and they lack depth. Now, I don't mind Six being a mystery to us. I mean, that's part of his persona. And with Lloyd, I mean, it helps to make his unhinged and crazed insanity even more plausible. But when we get Rege-Jean Page as a CIA uppity-up and Jessica Henwick as his second in command, they're flat characters. And that's not the fault of the actors. I mean, they're working with what they have. But when you have thin development, it's not surprising to have thin characters. Even Billy Bob Thornton in his fatherly type role is common and run-of-the-mill. Now, I liked him, but he wasn't terribly dynamic or interesting. And I think Wagner Moura may have been the most interesting side character, and that's just because he got to play a character. I mean, I know nothing about him or his motivations, but he felt like he had a persona, and he was just kooky enough to be a little bit memorable. Now, another bothersome element to the plot is that there is this tease of the old man. Now, apparently it's somebody in the shadows pulling the strings and ultimately calling the shots. But that remains a mystery all the way through. Did the story forget that they kept referencing somebody higher up? I mean, it was just odd to me to have this as the unseen threat to certain characters, which then dictated their motivations, and then to not have it fully addressed or answered. So overall, The Gray Man is an exciting action-packed thrill ride that barely ever lets up in the craziness of the thrills. Ryan Gosling is great as the mysterious and deadly Six, and Chris Evans is fun and then comically odd as the unhinged and infantile Lloyd. The story itself lacks depth with a premise that's uninspired and very predictable. The supporting characters, while acted well, aren't memorable or noteworthy, and the special effects are a mixed bag in their decency. But even with all these negatives, this is a great film for escapism. If you're looking for some mindless entertainment where you can just shut off your brain and just watch people go ham on each other, this fits the bill to a T and can be very satisfying. The 2 hours go by pretty quickly, especially because the action almost never stops. This is an easy watch and it will satisfy, even if it's not wholly memorable. There's no sex or nudity, a ton of profanity, and almost non-stop violence. I give The Gray Man 3 out of 5 couches. So what are some other movies that are heavy on action and thin on plot that you love to watch? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.